this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And my guest today is Matt Veatch. Matt is the president and COO and co-founder of Navidence, a SaaS company advancing the use of computable operational definitions for real-world data in clinical trials and evidence generation. So I'm excited to get into our conversation today, Matt, and thanks a lot for being a guest. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. First, Don, let me say thank you. Real pleasure to be a guest on the Life Science Success podcast. I've been looking forward to this, and just really enjoy conversations around life science, industry, career journeys. Your podcast is a perfect fit for my interest, so thank you.
Very good. Well, so before we dive in too much, I would love to just hear a little bit about your background and how you got into the life science industry.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a convoluted background, but I'll keep it fairly succinct. I sort of grew up in the CRO world, company that you may recall, legacy Quintiles. And I started out in a sales position, but quickly realized that there were other things to do in this very large company. And I joined a group of young executives that were sort of being groomed for positions of line management, and pretty quickly realized that that wasn't a great fit either, that line management in a large corporation, it's a great fit for some folks, but I was very interested in what was coming next. You know, what's on the cutting edge? Where can the company go? What are the areas of growth and opportunity? And what I would later realize in life is that I'm very entrepreneurial. Much more on that soon. But in the confines of a large corporation, what's next best to being an entrepreneur? Being an intrapreneur, and setting up different business entities, business units, some more successful than others, some being sort of absorbed into different business units, and others kind of freestanding. Some were spun out of the company. And for me, it was a lot of fun in sort of this entrepreneurial role, writing business plans or contributing to them, and setting up these entities that would later take life of their own. Along the way, I was actually, while I was at Quintiles, I was recruited to join the board of directors for an electronic data capture company called Omnicom Systems. And it was in that capacity that I saw this small fledgling 14-person company in kind of a Class B office space. That was my first foray really into the true entrepreneur world. And being on the board, it was great for me to have these vicarious experiences of entrepreneurism and growth. But it's also where I became very passionate about the use of data. Now, obviously, in this case, it was electronic data capture, sort of the early period of electronic case documents and building out data sets that way. I became very passionate about all types of data, accelerating research use cases, really time cycle compressing, to borrow from Six Sigma, the idea of research and thinking through how data could do that. And that was very influential because I was able to pivot my career in Quintiles to join the IT organization, where I was working very closely with folks who had vastly different backgrounds than mine, having grown up in sort of the clinical trial space, now with an interest in real world data. And that was sort of the early period of what would become real world evidence and real world data. And to be a part of that team was a lot of fun. I rose to a position of senior leadership where I was overseeing the data assets for the company, and had the opportunity for a relatively short time to be administrating the Data Governance Council. And it was there I was getting a lot of requests or questions about international data and how we could stimulate more and more access to international data. And I conceptualized and engaged with some executives in the counterpart company, which I'll mention here in just a second, but conceptualized an idea of a strategic collaboration between Quintiles and IMS Health. And uh, through positioning with senior leadership and finally eventually being given the permission to set up a strategic partnership, that sort of took a life of its own. It was a very successful partnership. The investors stepped in. It went sort of from me to a small team of a few folks with senior leaders closely involved to a team of now like 150 people managing it from an M&A perspective. But that was the seeding of the what would become the merger to form IQVIA. And so that was a great career chapter for me. But having been at the company by that time, 17 years, it was time to pivot, time to do something else. I became very, very interested and passionate about technology and its use in clinical trials, and moved to Inventive, which of course merged very soon after I joined the organization to form Syneos. And I was leading some deal transactions associated with decentralized research technologies. And after a couple of years, decided that I wanted to venture out on my own. That large corporate world was great, learned a lot, made a lot of good friends and connections, but it was time to set up at the time, consulting practice where I could work with a variety of life science companies, CROs, folks involved in supply of real world data, and that was a lot of fun. I actually had a consulting practice for many, many years. I kind of jokingly say, once you're a consultant, you never actually leave because people always try to continuously pull you back in. You probably know a lot about that. Um, but along the way, I had just a very fortuitous connection who became a good friend of mine, Aaron Kamahu. And he conceptualized for me an idea that would essentially cannibalize some of the consulting work that we were doing, but in a very good and a very appropriate way. And that cannibalization was really addressing a lot of questions around fit for purpose, finding real world data that can meet specific life science use case needs. Randomized controlled trials and RWE were kind of top of the list, and a platform that could actually help frame what are known as operational definitions in industry. That's a term that FDA uses a lot. You'll now see that in a lot of their draft and final guidance documents, because increasingly from a regulatory perspective, they want context. They want to be able to characterize the data. We'll talk about that a lot here in just a minute. And those operational definitions are critically important to success of the incorporation of real world data into, again, whatever design consideration it might be. And that became this whole idea of a platform. We sort of wrapped a company around that. It's called Navidence, or Navigating Evidence, and have a small team. We've been, we commercially launched last May. Although we've had a couple of years of development in our software, we knew that we had to launch with a platform that was very refined because of the sophistication of our user base. And it's been a lot of fun. It's quite a journey. And for me personally, it sort of led from being an intrapreneur to a consultant to now a real entrepreneur, and having diverse responsibilities, which I've really embraced. And for me, it's very exciting to be the chief operating officer for a startup organization.
Very good. How do you feel that your experience at Syneos Health and then also at IQVIA has influenced either your journey or the way that you think about and approach things?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I have a profound respect for the legacy company Quintiles, the company that it became, IQVIA, the work that they're doing on a global basis. The same with Syneos. Profound respect for those professionals that work very diligently in clinical research every day. And during my tenure, what I was able to experience was a group of just amazing, very smart people that were really advancing the service industry to meet those life science company needs. And that had a profound impact on me, that it's actually it's something that you can embrace and actually enjoy, being a part of the service organizations I would often get the question, well, when are you going to work for a sponsor company, or when are you going to go to the dark side? And for me, I enjoyed the variety of the CRO industry,
Mhm.
and always it was something different. And so I really, really embraced that and enjoyed it. The other thing that I had the opportunity to see over the course of my career, and again, 17 years at one sort of evolved company, was the bad old days of clinical trials, back in the era of paper and multi-part forms and the collection of that, and the laborious nature of research back in the day, as they say. And to see just in my career span profound evolution and change, and one could even call it in some ways revolution, but also that blending of the R&D world and the commercial world. And something that I mentioned, I'm very passionate also about decentralized research, being able to bring research to the patient wherever they are, and to see profound changes in technology, in capabilities to do that, in the logistics of research. All of these things have come together in the course of my career. And I couldn't be more excited or passionate about the life science industry as a career, and actively encourage people of various stages of their careers to explore and to look at the life science industry, because it is so richly rewarding and it's so diverse. There's so many different roles that are of great interest, and you can just really be passionate about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. That sort of brings to mind one thought as well that kind of goes back a little bit back to your consulting time. Um, when you were a consultant, what were some of the main challenges that you ran into that also were major lessons learned that you could pull forward to your current role whenever you're thinking about problems or approaching different challenges that you have?
Absolutely. And one bit of advice for anyone considering a career in consulting or setting up their shingle to consult, it's having high specificity around the scope of your consulting. Because if you have a diverse background, you can be pulled in so many different directions, and you have to be very, very passionate about each of those projects and the products of your clients. And so that's something that I learned pretty quickly. I wanted to be absolutely passionate about everything that I was working on. And that's why I really constrained my consultancy to focus on the commercial access of real world data, initially brokering some deals with the data supply and the data consumer, and really getting involved in that aspect of the RWD industry and making that available for a variety of different use cases, being mindful of patient privacy, of course, respecting that, respecting all of the policy that was in place and is in place today. That's critically important. And a lot of the questions that I was getting pertain to that access. Where do we start was a common question that I would get. And again, there's been increased knowledge and experience by individuals in the space over the last few years. Again, back in the sort of late 2017, early 2018 timeframe when I was launching the practice, um, there was maybe less knowledge around how to engage, and data aggregator really hadn't come yet to the forefront as a term. And so working through that process, also working to engage health systems to find bespoke data that was necessary to support a research use case. That was a lot of the focus of the work. I've often said my career has been about the business of science. I don't pretend to be an epidemiologist or a biostatistician, but I work very closely with them and I understand their needs, and would maintain that a lot of the issues confronting science are actually business, rooted in the business of programmatic management and programmatic budgets and those considerations. And working through that with clients was a lot of fun. I would often leverage my MBA in finance, because again, it's that blending of the business with the science and figuring out the optimal way forward, and making sure that the data that was obtained rigorously had been validated to match and ensure that it was going to meet the use case.
There was something that you said right at the very beginning, whenever you started to answer that question, that brought me back to something that happened today. So, a consultant had some time scheduled with me to kind of talk a little bit about scaling my current organization, which I've done a lot of, but at the same time, it's always good to have some external perspective as well. And so the conversation very much was, look, there are 50 things that you have to be doing. And I said, but here's the thing. I need this organization to be focused on 2, not 50. And so we just couldn't, at the end of the conversation, it was interesting because we just could not match sort of our statements that, I need a group of people that are very focused on the things that they are for the digital marketing organization that I have, and not focused on a bunch of other things. And, I feel like consultants can be the same way, right? I mean, I certainly have been called a generalist myself, that I, can cut across a lot of different verticals and I can support organizations in a lot of different ways. But it's very important to know what that is, especially if you're going to be, consulting with people. Hear the things that you offer, but also how you help them sort of achieve those things by providing an additional level of experience and focus and ability. So yeah, it's really important.
Well, the profound wisdom in that laser focus, and you're absolutely right. People will and organizations will try to pull you in other directions, and just because you have experience doesn't mean that you love or are passionate about certain aspects of that. And so, just being transparent. In fact, that's one of the questions that I ask consultants or suppliers today is, what's something that you're passionate about? And really hearing, and most people really embrace that question. They're happy to share what they love doing, and you're making an assessment basically of, hey, is this the area they're really passionate about, and that really helps in making decisions up front on how to work with people, how to leverage their real skills, talent, experience, and of course passion.
Yeah, absolutely. So with let's talk a little bit about Navidence first, and can you explain what is the organization's focus, what is your mission, and who do you serve in life sciences?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I'm just so passionate about the space. I'll kind of blend into a little bit on the company and the role all at the same time. But as I mentioned, Aaron and I and a couple of other really gifted, very very smart, uh, individuals that would become entrepreneurs. We launched a company together, and the focus was really creating what are known as digital phenotypes. And a digital phenotype, for those that may not have that background, it is basically the characterization of a patient from electronic data. So it can span claims data, electronic medical records, imaging, very important. All of those digital elements can be used to characterize a patient. And the issue is that a digital phenotype is a little too broad when you're actually trying to bring that back into, for example, a randomized controlled trial or an RWE study, and specifically match real world data elements to clinical care. That is the exhaustive healthcare that occurs every day, also known as electronic medical record data. Those are totally different data elements. These are coding ontologies. And, back when I was working with claims data in literally 2000, that was very cutting edge at the time to be using a secondary use of any kind of data associated with healthcare. And through the maturation of electronic medical records, seeing that rise of the broad deployment of electronic medical record systems and the access to that data in privacy compliant ways was really exciting. But at the same time, there has to be a good methodologically sound way to map those inclusion exclusion criteria to the data elements of electronic medical records. And industry today, there really isn't a good way to do that. So companies like large and small to mid or SMID biopharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, increasingly this is a challenge. They all want to incorporate real world data into their research designs, but they don't have a great way to map, to assess, and to understand down to the data element level the data that's needed. And so I had mentioned operational definitions earlier. To give a little bit more color to that, the starting point is a conceptual definition, and the conceptual definition might be an inclusion or exclusion criterion, and figuring out how that can be characterized through the data elements of the real world data leads to the operational definition. How are you actually operationalizing that definition to be valuable to the research? And that is the focus of our company. So we have very gifted MD and PhD medical informaticists that have amassed, and we license the coding content. These are things like ICD-10, CPT codes, the list kind of goes on and on, but all of those coding ontologies can be used to create that digital characterization. And so we create indication specific structured libraries, indication libraries that comprise our software as a service platform. And that content can be used to create the operational definitions. And then those codefs, as we call them, those codefs can be used to actually create the protocol, design the protocol in the what we call RWE Sherpa platform itself. And so it addresses an operational consideration for life science companies. It also addresses an internal communication and stakeholder engagement consideration, because so often, and from the consulting era, for both Aaron and I, we would have conversations with different senior leaders, med affairs, biostats, pharmacoepi, and just getting a consensus around a definition could be a months-long process. And often, especially biopharmaceutical companies, would take weeks and weeks with a small team of let's just be honest, very expensive individuals developing code lists, trying to sort of cobble together a characterization of a diagnosis code and codes that sort of capture the essence of a time variable or covariates. And that's okay. And we could do a lot of that from a consulting perspective. But again, Aaron's vision was a platform that really could address this in a very methodologically sound, cohesive way. And indeed, that is the formation of Navidence. How we teamed together was really tackling this issue for life science companies. But now there's also broader application, because those real world data supply companies, we can turn this around where they can actually use the codefs to characterize the data they have. So look at that. So instead of fit for purpose, it's sort of purpose for fit. Does that make sense? Actually characterizing their data to make it available and to radically reduce the feasibility time associated with those assessments that, again, historically could take weeks, if not a couple of months. So that's the major thrust of the company. And just lastly, we also see increasing uptake in interest in AI companies. As we all know, there's billions of dollars of investment that are going into AI today. And those that have a life science focus are benefiting from great precision and focus around a very specific patient characterization or digital phenotype. And that's all rooted in sound computable operational definitions.
That was one of the questions that came to mind for me as well, is whether or not if the codefs were used as frameworks, not just essentially, the other way around, right? So it sounds to me like there is a bidirectional relationship in our industry.
Absolutely. We kind of characterize that a little bit as almost like an operating system. And we often will address that with our clients who ask, well, Navidence, how do you get your data? Not so fast. We are like the operating system between the data supplier and the data consumer. It is the computable operational definitions create that medium of exchange, of communication. And it isn't our access to the data. It can be deployed in any data set and completely in a data agnostic manner.
So are CODEF something that the regulatory bodies also use, and does it help support organizations in the process?
Well, I am very pleased to say absolutely. They call them operational definitions, and we've kind of embellished that a little bit to characterize and highlight the computable nature of that. It's one thing to create something; it's another to actually be able to deploy that behind a health system firewall during a real world data assessment, for example. And so, um, where we see increasingly, and I can reference very specifically the final guidance from July of 2024, RWD assessing electronic health records and medical claims data to support regulatory decision making for drug and biologic products. Uh, to your point, it specifically says general consideration or conceptual definitions and operational definitions for study design elements, inclusion exclusion criteria for study population exposures, outcomes, covariates, and the results of those validation studies. So literally FDA is asking for operational definitions. And the problem is the industry today, prior to Navidence, didn't have a good way to do that.
Hmm.
Again, it was this sort of nights and weekends of a team, typically a couple of clinicians, a biostatistician, an epidemiologist, and a data scientist kind of hashing out those codes. That is a cumbersome and very manual and time consuming process. And if you look at the opportunity cost of that time, as well as the literal cost of that, those hours of, again, some, very, very expensive individuals in these companies, having a platform that can much more easily in a matter of hours and with even better precision help to guide these teams working in life science companies, that's, we feel, critically important, and the genesis for the company and our growth as we have been sort of welcomed into large pharma companies where they initially say, "Oh no, we developed code lists ourselves," and then we sort of highlight the difference, and then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, we've just created some champions." They absolutely see the value and the utility and the time savings.
Very good. What are some of the innovative projects that you're particularly proud of? I mean, I understand that you're probably not able to talk specifics about customers, but would love to hear, some of the things that you're most proud of that you're currently working on.
Yeah, you're right. We obviously keep strict confidentiality on the specifics of projects, but being able to work on some of the cutting edge drugs that are in the market today that everyone is sort of aware of in different areas of research, that's a lot of fun. And really being able to clearly define these patient populations to help from a targeting perspective, to help with the protocol design or refinements over time, to better structure cohorts of patients. For us, that's very, very rewarding. And I would say that the other area that we're really excited about is that increasing uptake and use from the real world data supply side and the AI companies, as I already mentioned, who benefit greatly from that tremendous precision and being able to train their algorithms around these very specific patient populations.
I also, in doing some of my research, I ran across this name, Nested Knowledge. Can you tell us about your relationship or partnership with Nested Knowledge?
Absolutely. And it's with a pleasure too, because they're a formal strategic partner of ours. In the early days of Navidence, we were exploring ways that we could rapidly interrogate literature, which is kind of the starting point for a lot of the codes of interest. And some of those have been well published. There's been validation studies, and we wanted to assemble using AI tools ourselves these journal articles, medical literature. It's basically a systematic literature review in each indication. And we were introduced to the Nested Knowledge team. And in fact, they were a consulting client of mine for a period of time. And we realized that they were just so amazingly smart and talented and put together this amazing team that to try to recreate any wheels was going to be nonsensical, and that it made a lot of sense to work with whom we felt was absolutely best in class, and that was the Nested Knowledge team. And two brother founders that were serial entrepreneurs had a successful exit with a medical device while they were in their early 20s. It was just kind of an amazing story, but really, really intelligent people who just absolutely that are passionate about systematic literature reviews and the interrogation of literature. They kind of shared our enthusiasm and passion for real world data, and putting those two together has been tremendously powerful. So they greatly accelerate our ability using their nested capabilities, essentially creating a nest around the literature and being able to rapidly interrogate that directly supports our ability to create the indication libraries and to create the eventual codefs.
Very good. And we were talking before the show, you happened to mention that you have a podcast of your own. I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about what is the focus of that? Who do you talk to? And where can people check you out?
Yeah, thanks. Quick story, Aaron and I were kind of in the early stages of our friendship, both consultants, and very frustrated back in late 2020, actually early 2021, with COVID and the inability to go to conferences, and couldn't see people that we wanted to engage with, and decided that we would ride the coattails of an app that's actually proven to be very beneficial to us, the Clubhouse app. And we would have a house set up on Clubhouse. And initially it was just a informal conversations, get together, chat, meet up. And we realized that having a guest as kind of a focal point for the conversations, that was great. Increasingly, we had feedback that the guest's personal journey, sort of getting to know the guest, that was incredibly well received. And eventually, with the replays feature that Clubhouse launched, I believe in the fall of 2021, we were able to create a means of capturing our content, having that professionally edited, and that became the podcast, where we interview luminaries in the fields of real world data, real world evidence, and the adjacencies. Sometimes we'll have conversations more focused on clinical operations and RCTs. But in general, it's a focus on real world data and real world evidence, the personal journey, some questions, and then we actually have live audience participation, around 12 to 15 people per week. It's much more fun than I ever realized a podcast could be, because you get to just connect with people. It's something that everyone's passionate about. You get to hear personal journeys. And I was kind of reflecting on people that I've worked with over the years. I'm sure, Don, you've seen this as well. You just sort of start working with someone, and especially in larger companies, and you may get along well. You're kind of doing your thing, but there's no real insight to sort of their background and their career journey. So pulling back the curtain on that, it's been a lot of fun, and people like to share when they're sort of encouraged to, hey, tell us your journey. And everyone's a little defensive. It's like, well, I didn't start out in this at all. I said, of course, that's the beauty of it. It's that circuitous journey that we love to get into and just kind of hear those professional stories. That again leads into some questions, and it's a lot of fun. We do cap it at 1 hour though, because we know that is an appropriate amount of time that a busy professional can sort of listen in and catch an episode and enjoy it. And we went with Wednesday because statistically we saw that that was the highest probability day for a live audience participation. So real world Wednesday, RWW, and it's kind of a little tongue-in-cheek joke, because the last thing we really needed was another 3-letter acronym that starts with R. But there it is.
And then when do they get released, I guess, or do you still do it on Clubhouse?
We do. Yeah, we've actually explored some other technologies. The ability to have the live audience, that's a big part of it. we are able to release within a couple of days post live episode. And we are on Spotify. We're the RWD and RWE podcast on Spotify. Also, we have a website, rwd-rwe.club, and all of our content shows up there.
Perfect. All right. Very good. Couple questions about you. So what is the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, I really enjoy that question because I've thought about some of the key influences and the people that I've worked for and with over the years. And I would say one of the most influential, and this is someone that I worked with early stages of Quintiles, who would often say a good leader doesn't lead, they lift. And I thought, early stages, what do you mean by that? Doesn't if you're lifting people up, doesn't that mean that you're helping? No. It's lifting them to do the best job that they can do, to be motivated, to lift them up mentally, psychologically. A good leader is very adept at doing that. So that's something that I try to embrace. A good leadership is around lifting the people around you, getting the best from everyone, and giving your absolute best to them. And I would say that's probably been the hallmark of leadership, developing my own style of leadership now, but just over the years, trying to deploy variations of that in every position that I held.
Very good. Matt, what inspires you?
I would say working with exceptionally talented teams. And I realize that maybe that's kind of I don't know, underwhelming answer, but when you get to experience the proverbial 1+1 = 3, well, that's great. But that 1+1 that equals 27, I haven't had that experience too many times in my life, and I've actually experienced that. And for me, it was just eye-opening to see the amazing transformation and just progress that can be made around really, really challenging issues and topics. Great insights, being able to bring that to bear very quickly. That for me is inspiring.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I've experienced it myself, and I remember saying to somebody, because they had asked, "Are you afraid that at some point that we're going to fail?" And I said, if you open your eyes wide enough right now, you can see how much momentum is behind us. It's not even us pushing anymore. It's that there's so much momentum because of everything that we've built and all the great stuff that we've done, that I don't think anybody can slow this locomotive down right now. I think, realistically, it would take some pretty substantial things to make it even slow for a beat, let alone, be derailed at all. So, that was kind of my answer for the same thing. It's like, that you feel that multiplication factor and you could feel it coming together. And it's just an amazing experience as a leader that I've also seen as well. And it's a great experience. So, yeah.
I love that. Absolutely. Yeah. It is like a freight train of momentum, and it's kind of a hang on for dear life because great things are going to happen.
Right. Exactly. So to that same point, Matt, what concerns you?
Yeah, I would say, and certainly not delving into politics whatsoever, I would say disruptions in research are a real concern and consideration. Uh, Many reasons for things that are happening today, but disrupted funding, operational capabilities. That's a real concern to me because in many clinical research projects, especially, but even before that, in terms of earlier stages of R&D, when you disrupt the program, it isn't a couple of months, let's restart. It can be years before that research can recover. And so, that I would say is one of my biggest concerns and
Yeah, I mean,
fears.
just for anybody that's not experienced in this, I'll just share maybe one element of this that I'm closely monitoring for a couple of different companies. Um, there are biobanks of tissue samples that we have that are in some way they have to be maintained throughout time. And let's just say that the research is paused, that's fine. But somebody has to pay for the electricity and for the keeping the samples frozen and for just essentially holding things while essentially we figure out what's going to happen with funding for these companies. Luckily, we've had some folks, step up and just say, hey, look, I mean, given some of the challenges, we understand that. We're willing to sort of carry these samples, for you, in a couple of different instances, but without that good fortune, to your very good point. I mean, this research essentially would have just been somewhat wasted, and you'd have to start back over with brand new fresh samples the moment that you got funded again. And so I feel like there's a part of this that people just don't understand overall, that fundamentally, the United States has carried a lot of this stuff, for a good long time. Sure, you could make an argument for or against. Politically, I frankly don't care about that side of it. But from the scientific perspective, it's going to create a void that, unfortunately, hopefully we don't feel the time that the next pandemic hits or the time some other big disease hits that we'd like to save somebody from, going through all that pain. So I definitely have seen sort of the periphery of this, and I'm seeing that some pretty scary things that could happen if they continue to sort of cut deeply in terms of research budgets. And it's not even just at the government level. The corporations also now have to really focus their dollars and make sure that they're supporting things in the right way.
Yeah, and being mindful that many of these programs are decades long in some cases. Outcomes research. It isn't a few years. And having the ability to have sustainable funding for the long term, I think that is a critical consideration for anyone in the research arena. And again, back to the point of fear, seeing wonderful research disrupted is just that's a concern.
Absolutely. Last question: what excites you?
Yeah, well, on a personal front, I like zipping down the mountains on my bicycle. Living here in Colorado, but aside from that, professionally, I'm really excited about just and again, maybe this is kind of a simplistic answer, but the rise of AI, it's a buzzword. I'm glad that we're moving past the buzzword status of this. And I don't mean just in the life science industry. I mean, every industry, it's affecting everything. And that is so exciting to see. We're living things that we'll be talking to our grandchildren about, and they'll, laugh in amazement as I did talking to my either great grandparents or grandparents. I had the pleasure of knowing all of them. They would talk about the technological advancements and, the introduction of the television and the impact that had. And, just laughing as a kid and then realizing that I am living a lot of that history today. And when I'm talking to my grandchildren about the early days of AI and something that they will eat, sleep, breathe, it'll be such a part of their life. They probably won't even call it AI by that point in time. And for me, that's exciting. I just couldn't be more excited about that aspect of our evolving world and the mental fortitude that it's taken for so many teams to come up with such amazing innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's already hard enough. We went to I took my grandsons south of Denver. We went on a train ride, and in that sort of stop at a train station, one of the things that one of my grandsons saw was a payphone, and he said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, this is the early cell phone. Whenever you were traveling, this is the only way to call home. So, you had to find one of these to be able to call home, back long ago." And so anyway, yeah, I mean, we'll interestingly enough get to live through a couple more of these cycles, and I mean, there are a few things that stand out in my mind. One, compute power, and where it'll be, later in my life. Two, where will music be? Because, for sure we'll have new creative ways of sharing music. And what happens next, essentially is the next question. But I did hear somebody say, back to your AI point, they said that software is now being developed 85% faster. And so they said, because of coding models and other things, people are able to essentially churn out, the early phase of software and kind of work through, whatever human beings actually need to do next, a lot faster as well. And so I was just like, that is a true leap, for anybody that's had to sit there and hard code, stuff, since the beginning. Now all of a sudden you can get a jump start, obviously, with AI, and that's a pretty significant one.
Well, and just the news releases around new models almost every day. We're having a meeting internally about something that has literally changed in the day that we're talking about it. It's just profound.
Yeah. Well, Matt Veatch, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. Thank you for telling me about Navidence and the things that you're doing there. I wish you well, and look forward to staying in touch and hearing more about the journey that you guys are on.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciated it. It was a great discussion. Enjoyed being part of the podcast. Thank you for asking me to be a guest, and just wish you much success. It's an exciting space.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.